the summer break for most of the people joining from Indian institutions, but that's the way the schedule has worked out for us. This is the next iteration of the SDG symposium from the UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies, and today we are looking at SDG 5 on gender equality. And our visitor speaker today is Professor Bonnie Zare of Virginia Tech. She's actually an old friend of the department, not just English, but also the Women's Studies Center, Sociology and others, and brings students over on a regular basis to the University of Hyderabad. I believe you know our colleague, Dr. Kati, who has just joined from Kakatiya University. So welcome to all of you, some of our regulars, some new ones, and welcome most of all to Bonnie, who she just told us has been attending other conferences. So for us, so special thanks to her. I'll now hand this over to Atul for the MC work. Over to you, Atul. Oh, by the way, Anna makes her excuses because she's traveling and can't be here. Over to you, Atul.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everyone. Hi. Welcome to yet another talk of the literature of vulnerability. Our speaker today is Professor Bonnie Zare from Virginia Tech. And before we begin, if I may introduce the speaker to you, Bonnie Zare is the Director of Women's and Gender Studies at Virginia Tech. She has made yearly stays in India since 2002, focusing on Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. She focuses on discourses of identity, feminism, and activism in contemporary India. And her most recent work looks at casteism. Zare's articles have appeared in Women's Studies International Forum, Humanity and Society, and South Asian Review, among others. She is on the international board of Aarti for Girls, which is an organization which helps low-income girls in Andhra Pradesh. Her talk today is titled Gendered Timelines, Literary Acts of Feminist and Queer Temporal Resistance. With this, may I hand it over to Professor Bonnie Zare. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thanks to all my friends and colleagues who've gathered here today. It's a real honor to be able to present this to you. I want to thank also Dr. Dilip Das for introducing me to Pramod Noyar. I'd obviously read his work before, but special shout out to him from EFLU. So we'll begin with a simple but urgent reminder. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5 affirms that gender equality is not a side issue. It's fundamental to human rights and essential to a sustainable, prosperous world. The goal demands the end of child marriage, human trafficking, and violence against women. It calls for equal pay, for equitable representation, and for the elimination of discrimination in every context. So these are crucial and widely supported aims. And let me go ahead and move to my first slide. So you see some of the targets here listed on the slide. And I'm going to talk in particular about target 5.4. So these are crucial goals that a lot of people agree on, but my question is, how do we get beyond the framework and really start to radically rethink things, particularly when you look at target 5.4, value unpaid care and promote shared domestic responsibilities? I want to look at this question by looking at how literature helps us see and resist the dominant timelines that structure our understanding of progress and gender and of work. Many of the efforts to achieve gender equality are grounded in linear temporal models, narratives that move from past to present as if progress is always a destination in the future. But these neat, straight timelines often mask the complexity of power. They assume everyone starts from the same place, that all lives unfold at the same pace. And that's simply not true. What if for many, the future promised by dominant culture is not liberation, but repetition? This is where literature steps in. It gives us a space not just to imagine new futures, but to question the structure of time itself. So it invites us to think about time differently. To bring justice to the idea of valuing unpaid care, we likely need to reimagine the very framework of time. So I want to say, of course, time is inescapable for all of us, right? It's a force which trains us and constrains us. And in our capitalist and profit-driven society, we know that it's extremely teleological, right? It's associated with men and male competition. We're constantly asked to discipline our bodies and go towards an endpoint to come up with a product or a deliverable. But this is only one form of time. Cyclical time has another rhythm and is also present. The land has a cyclical movement, responding to, for instance, weather, which moves itself in a cycle of seasons. The household has its own cycle. People rise. They must nourish themselves. Food preparation has to take place. These daily responsibilities often fall to women, to carry out at least partially or wholly. And feminist and queer theory asks, what forms of time are we ignoring, and how can we reallocate time? And I'll just mention that I'm drawing on two theories in particular. I'm thinking about Michael Flaherty's theories of time, particularly the way he talks about how human beings are affected by time, but also affect time. He says in The Lathe of Time, 2020, human beings make choices in the course of social interaction, but these choices are constrained by your past, present, and future. Put differently, temporal experience is a complicated mixture of determinism and self-determination. So we'll be looking at this mixture in the stories we examine, and I'll also draw on Elizabeth Freeman's work. Elizabeth Freeman has talked about how in our current time, we're asked to press maximum productivity from the body. And she calls that being chrononormative. Right? That's a demand. And in the case of women, productivity also equals human reproductivity itself. Around the world, women are told that marriage and motherhood are achievements they have to gain, and that that's the only way they're full, successful adults. And I would say that SDG 5, gender equality, can only be achieved when we agree it's a violation to suggest that we're testing people as to whether they can reproduce, cook, and clean when all persons are capable of taking on these caretaking acts. Okay. So I've established that, and now I want to show you the book titles, some of the book titles that I'll be talking about. So we're basically looking to literature to expand timelines or to think about time differently. And I'm going to first begin with Alice Walker's The Color Purple of 1982. And that's beginning, of course, in America, in the South. Then we're going to move to India with Priyamvada Purushottam's The Purple Line of 2012. And both of these novels expose the harsh limitations of reproductive timelines being imposed upon women, again, as sort of a test for women. Next, we consider another aspect of bodily experience by looking at a short story, Salma's Toilets, and another short story by M.M. Vinodini, Block. Through these stories, we see how the denial of public infrastructure becomes a denial of moving about along a timeline easily, right? It interrupts your daily cycle of finding a toilet is so very difficult, and it degrades the dignity of female embodiment. The last part of the talk will look at a graphic memoir, actually meant for teenagers, Maya Kobabe's Gender Queer, 2022, which resists a standard timeline of gender development. And thereby it provides a non-dualistic framework for us to consider as a horizon of freedom. Alice Walker's The Color Purple, 1982, takes place on an isolated Georgia farm beginning in 1909, as a rural, poor Black family scrapes out an existence after centuries of slavery. And it's an epistolary novel, so we are reading the main character, Celie's letters. She's addressing those letters to, quote, the only man she knows besides her father, and that is God. And it is an incredibly memorable first page because we are instantly in looking at the world through the eyes of a very uneducated, simple 14-year-old girl. It begins with her saying, writing down, you better not tell nobody but God. It'd kill your mammy. The person, this is told to her by her father, who has impregnated her. But she doesn't even know how babies are made. She doesn't know the act that she was forced to do will lead to a child, and is completely shocked when a child comes out of her body. And this person who she thinks is her father, but turns out to be her stepfather, has threatened her not to tell anyone that he had sex with her. When she finds out, when she answers her mother as to who sent this baby, or how did the baby get there, she says, she asked me, whose is it? I say, God's. I don't know no other man, or what else to say. When I start to hurt, and then that little baby come out my pussy, chewing on its fist, well, you could have knocked me over with a feather. Celie tells us through letters to God that each of her two babies is taken from her by the father, and her father, and she thinks they are murdered, or it turns out they're sold. They're given away. The reader gets a punch in the gut in these first few pages because we take in the crime of incest. We take in that Celie's mother eventually dies of illness. We take in the shock of having your babies taken away from you. And it's one of the clearest literary illustrations in the American canon of how a woman's timeline can be completely dictated to by a forced pregnancy, a rape, and then that closes down other possible pathways or timelines. Celie's vulnerability through her race, her socioeconomic deprivation, her gender, her age, scar themselves on the reader's mind, aided by the form as well as the content. So she pours out her thoughts first to God and then to her sister in African American vernacular English. Her thoughts appear without punctuation, of course, alluding to the fact that she wouldn't have been able to be educated. She would have been, unable to be allowed into school, like all of her people. And Alice Walker has said how important oral histories are in this context. In an essay called Saving the Life That Is Your Own, she talked about the great need to hear her female ancestors' stories told aloud. And she said they were just as important as reading any writing by a Black woman. Later in the novel, there's a moment in which Celie is working with two other workers, and they say, oh, you're speaking so Black, you need to correct that so you'll get respect from the larger white community. And Celie says, only a fool would want you to talk in a way that was peculiar to your mind. So there's a defense of speaking naturally, of sharing thoughts, of being a confidant, and of using the words that are most true to you. Through Celie's unfiltered language, the reader becomes a confidant, not simply a witness of her experiences of repeated violation. This includes the near rape of her sister, the stepfather's hiding of letters, her constant beating. She's forced to take care of her husband's 4 children. So she later, she marries someone named Mr. The person's so distant from her, she feels so forced into this that we really just have his name as Mr. Blank for most of the novel. As Celie writes to God, quote, because he's the only other man I know, besides her rapist, her letters are unsigned. This underscores the ghostly dismissal, the way Mr. sees her. He says, quote, you can't curse nobody. Look at you. You Black, you poor, you ugly, you a woman. God damn, he say, you nothing at all. When Celie makes the discovery, her husband prevented her from reading the letters sent by her sister from Africa over a period of 30 years. Celie is in shock. She gets to read the letters, but she finds that they're hidden away in a trunk, and she thought her sister was dead because she hadn't heard from her. Feeling utterly betrayed, she decides she can't write to God anymore because he doesn't seem to listen to a brown woman. And she writes to her sister instead. And that move is a big move in showing women finding solace in solitude and solidarity with each other. Now, for most of the book, it would seem her timeline is, just completely forced upon her by heteropatriarchal colonialism and the post-slavery situation. But a new rhythm appears when a new character appears, and that is the sexy, fully independent blues singer, Shug. Short for Sugar. Shug reveals a brand new model for Celie of Black female strength. And Celie eventually undergoes a transformation as Shug accepts her, as Shug says to her, "You shouldn't be beaten." And eventually the two of them have a romantic alliance, which is actually one of the first celebrations of lesbian romance in the African American canon. Under Shug's spell, Celie gets in touch with joy, finally. And by the end of the novel, the strength of other women, which includes her sister, Nettie, and Sophia, as well as Shug, Celie becomes an agent of her own life. She does express that temporal self-determination. She actually opens her own industry, which is making pants. So she becomes a businesswoman. She moves basically from a lavender gray vision to the godlike vibrant color purple that's named in the title. At Virginia Tech, we have a very famous poet who has recently died, African-American poet, Nikki Giovanni. And she said what so many white readers and white onlookers to Black culture miss is that Black love is Black wealth. And while there's many novels I could have chosen, I think that this, as departing from the marriage plot ending and celebrating or depicting women's resilience, I especially admire the color purple for celebrating how the loving support between Black women has the power to break through a timeline that is imposed by a patriarchal and capitalist and colonialist version that just makes Black women, the particular prisoners of reproductive time. Okay, so now we're going to move to India to continue considering how timelines and temporal relationships are gendered. And we're moving to a book, we're considering a group of women who are grappling with the demand to be mothers and taking up Chennai writer Priyamvada Purushottam's book, The Purple Line. And I just want to say that I had the privilege of meeting this author at the Hyderabad Literary Festival, which I know has only grown in importance and size since 2012, or I think it was 2013 that I met her right after this book had come out, and she read from the book. And I teach the novel regularly. The novel, which was shortlisted for the Shakti Short First Book Prize, is organized around 6 women who come to the same Chennai gynecologist, all of them depending on a certain reproductive timeline, each of them focusing on the purple lines of a pregnancy test. Some want to be pregnant, some don't want to be pregnant, some only want to be pregnant if they can have a son. So that's the premise of the book. And there are many characters I could talk about, including the narrator, gynecologist herself, who's very interesting. But owing to time constraints, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Megha, the character Megha. Megha is a Marwari Jain from a lower income family who is married up in wealth. She is routinely made to feel inferior by her family, the members of her husband's family, because they refer to how she speaks English with an accent, or they refer to the kind of dowry she brought. And Megha's mother-in-law, who accompanies her to her gynecology appointments, has a kind of a menacing quality in the book. She waddles in, and the narrator inwardly calls her the demon duck of doom. So she's making it very clear that Megha, having given birth to 2 daughters, now better make this pregnancy a son. Megha, like Seeley, is denigrated as a mule almost, or a donkey, a servant, and yet she has the imagination to be much more. And I'll show you a passage where we see that. The grandfather at the table is saying that the women don't have to be served the tea first to a British visitor, that they should be served tea or snacks last, and says, "We put the donkey last." That night, Megha dreamt that her ears had grown long. She tries to push them back, but they keep growing. She takes a lion's mask from under the bed and wears it over her unwieldy head, covering her donkey face and donkey ears, until all she can see is the fearless face of a lion. Someone calls her, and she turns around with her spectacular mane and opens her mouth to say something. But what comes out is an ear-splitting ee-ah. Right? So she has this imagination to be the lion, to be Durga, to be the person with the boldness and the bravery, but feels very encased by this donkey image. When we follow Megha, we often see her in the kitchen, working her fingers to the bone, preparing items from scratch, and being criticized by her mother-in-law as not good enough. Now, Megha eventually gives birth not to a son, but to a daughter. The 3rd daughter has a heart defect, and this condition causes the family actually to embrace her. That's something unexpected. Then Megha learns she is anemic and can't try for a 4th child, and something shifts inside her. Unlike Seeley's shift, we see Megha's shift as a mini rebellion, right? So what she decides to do, she wants to spend time in her bed with her daughters and spending time helping them with their homework. And she deliberately pours some steaming hot water on her own stomach when she goes to pour tea, and she tries to make it look like an accident. And this allows her to stay in bed and spend more time for a short period with her daughters. Now, obviously, we're not applauding and celebrating this self-harm, but we can have faith that Megha is slowly rebuilding her vision of women as being undeserving of the way she's been treated. And she's starting to redream her daughters' lives. She thinks, I need to make sure my 3 little girls grow up and stand on their own feet, so they break free from this cycle, this time, right, line of bonded labor, dowry, marriage, labor, birth, dowry, marriage, labor, birth. All right, I'm going to stop the slide share now. I don't have slides to share for a little bit of time, so I'm going to see if I can. Did I stop sharing the slides? Can you just let me know?
Yes, you did. Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so now we're going to move to this idea of bodily time. So taking a shift here. What happens when bodily time is denied even basic dignity? Looking into something as basic as going to the toilet helps us see that we have a lot more work to do before some of the demands of the SDG 5 or gender equality are met. So we're going to look at this basic bodily time, as I mentioned, through Tamil writer Salma's short story Toilets of 2009, translated into English at 2012, and Telugu writer Vinodi's story Block, which is 2012 and 2021. Salma, who is from the small town of Tuvarankurchi in Tamil Nadu, was barred from further education at age 13 and confined to her home. So she became a closet writer. And she has several works of poetry to her name. And it was because her area was an all-women's constituency, and she actually ran for local office, that she credits to coming out as a writer and being able to help her achieve the autonomy she has today. She was eventually the chairperson of the State Social Welfare Board of Tamil Nadu. Salma unapologetically shares ideas from a female worldview, and toilets is no exception. It begins as Shamim is helping an elderly aunt, and the doctor asks this aunt, "Why did you suppress the urge to pee?" So the aunt is having stomach trouble, and she's come on a bus which only had men on it, and she couldn't go to the bathroom for hours and hours. She didn't let herself. And Shamim seems very impatient. So we are, as readers, thinking that she feels just like the doctor. Why are you doing this? But the story gradually reveals that Shamim has been doing the same thing for years. And memory by memory, we see how her body has been reconditioned by this inability to go to the toilet comfortably and at the natural times. Now, this is an unusual premise for a story. And, you think, could a harmless trip to the bathroom really be the basis of an entire story? But absolutely, yes. We see Shamim waiting as a teenager for the construction workers to move farther away from the bathroom, the toilet, right? We see her dealing with her monthly cycle and, trying to get out and hide things from her brother. We see her trying to pee in a sari while pregnant. She deals with a bathroom in the hotel room on her honeymoon, not wanting to make any noise, fearing that will offend her husband. She might be trying to defecate at the edge of a field while visiting her relatives, and they're telling her, hurry up for your safety. So we walk with her to these places, and we learn how this simple act becomes a trial and then a growing sense of dread. And then that's merely the emotional side. There's also the physical side. So this starts to affect her. It creates long-term health problems. We feel directly through the story how girlhood and womanhood become a time of bodily deprivation. By the end of the story, we hear words like terror associated with the need to pee. The physical object of the toilet itself becomes a target of hatred to Shamim. It becomes a symbol of how women are severely restrained from simply attending to bodily needs, which make noise or which involve the removal of clothing. And the story does an excellent job of compressing these indignities and showing the degraded status of living in female bodily time. Vinodini's heart-wrenching story, and she may be on the call, I'm not sure, but I will mention her biography first. Mary Madhasu Vinodini was born in Guntur and has become a well-known Telugu writer and activist. She teaches Telugu literature at Yogi Vemana University, and she has a bold tone and is unafraid to express the experiences of women in particular. I'm very grateful to her for sharing the story block with me, and its English translation by K. Purushottam is very admirable, and we were able to get this published in the Journal of International Women's Studies in its English version in 2021. So this heart-wrenching story block goes an important step further than the story I just told you about in exposing degrading conditions for women. Not only gender, but caste and class can, of course, determine who controls time and who is controlled by it, who is able to rid themselves of waste, and who gets sort of associated with waste itself. In the story block, we follow the time of a soil collector, Jilakarama, on her daily rounds. By reading the lines of a story, we put ourselves in that position. We must smell, feel, and see waste up close and for hours simply to stay alive. Jilakarama becomes synonymous with the shit and the tools that she carries to scrape it up. We see her weaving her way between narrow alleys, carrying this on her head. The rain brings it down in slops, making her body a longer version of the broom she carries. In the houses she serves, the people treat her the same as they treat the waste itself, almost like holding their noses as they talk to her. Meeting Jilakarama, though, we move with a person of dignity and competence. Living in such a precarious situation, we would think she's going to steal from these people or she's going to do something to be able to get more bread. But no, not at all. She steadfastly serves them, sacrificing her own health every day, despite the utter disgust shown to her. Beyond surviving on her meager wages, something bad has just happened at the start of the story. She's faced with a dilemma. She must get her daughter married. Her daughter's reputation is at stake. Her daughter's been seen with this man, and the father is demanding 1,000 rupees by the end of the month for that first installment of dowry. Well, Jilakarama does not have 1,000 rupees. She has no family to turn to. Her husband left her right after she gave birth. He left off with another woman. And though she's worked for these households for the past 25 years, they will not give her an advance of any money. So she and her best friend hatch a plan. She will first block all the regular toilets she serves with stones, so the area will be full of smell, and then she'll collect extra fees by offering to unblock them. Well, I know it will not surprise you to learn the plan doesn't work. She gets found out. She gets found out as the person who's blocked the toilets, and 6 landowners wait for her at the end of the day, and they strip her in imagery reminiscent of the stripping of Draupadi. Finally, one particularly vengeful person beats her to near death, and in the story's final lines, we learn that the money she's been saving for her daughter's dowry is taken from her. So the wedding is blocked. So there's more to be said here, of course, about casteism, about economic inequality, about human cruelty. But for our purposes, I want to focus on how easily society misses that this is a form of cyclical time and cyclical care work. She's honoring the cyclical time of the body. The writer brings us into this worker's diligent scraping of waste and patience, and the way she treats all bodies as if she might be caring for her own by being so steadfast. It's almost like she's wiping the behinds or the bottoms of all the babies in the streets and the toddlers and cleaning the air for everybody, right? So if service is part of dharma, attending to bodily processes cannot be an exception. Right? We know this from poets. We know this from Ravidas, right? The cobbler poet of Benares, who said, quote, "No living being is spared the degradations of the flesh, and whoever prefers to think otherwise is dwelling in the world of make-believe." We know this from Swami Ramdas, who spoke of the body as a vehicle for conveying kindness. He said, "When we feed, clothe, and attend on anybody, we feel like doing all these things to our own body, for which we do not expect any return, because all bodies are our own. We, as the all-pervading Atman or spirit, reside in all bodies." So, like these poets, the Nodini's story block insists on the body's contribution to spiritual wisdom. Man or woman, all can find the unity and the importance of cyclical bodily time and care work. So, major shift now, leaving India, moving to the US, and thinking now a little bit about timelines from a queer perspective. And I want to pause and just say that one of the things you might have noticed during the pandemic was there was talk of, are we going back? Are we going back to the old timeline? Or can we as humans use this crisis to change the timeline? And I know with my queer colleagues and friends, there was a lot more talk of changing the timeline and maybe recognizing some of the limitations of our former timelines. So I think it's really important to consider how trans and queer identities reshape the arc of life. As people break away from marriage and parenting, and by that I mean no disregard or disrespect to marriage or parenting, but just I don't like the idea of marriage or parenting as a test of every woman and their success in life. That's what I'm specifically saying. As we break away from that as mandatory time markers, queer people and other people are free to create chosen families and to reshape time. And so I'm going to think through this through discussing Maya Kobabe's Genderqueer, a memoir. This is a book aimed at teen readers, and it's centering on Maya's learning that they're non-binary. But before we discuss the book, I want to think through the word non-binary and just sort of talk about the concept, and I'll go ahead and share the slides again. So look at these words. I just want you to take a moment quietly to yourself and think about what comes to mind when you see these words. I want you to consider your own reaction if you have any discomfort. And I'm going to, of course, go with the word, but you see we have many words for this phenomenon. And I'm going to go with the word non-binary as that's the word that the author uses to describe themselves. But if you have discomfort, I think one thing that's interesting to think about is that you don't probably have as much discomfort with the words gender roles. And the famous American psychologist, Sandra Bem, who gave us that term, gender roles, she, near the end of her life, felt like gender roles are so entrenched that one of the only ways we can get to the gender equality of SDG 5 might be to explode the very categories themselves. That's almost the only way to think ourselves out of this system. So I do think, again, it's just really important when we're talking about gender to talk about the possible breaking free from gender itself. So when we consider gender, of course, we often think about a listing mechanism, a biological listing mechanism, but the work of Anne Fausto Sterling and others has helped challenge that, right? In 2010, neuroscientist Cordelia Fine, in Delusions of Gender, takes, for instance, a compelling case that rather than being hardwired, gender roles become written on our brains through repetition, through the behaviors that we're encouraged to carry out. Looking at neuroscientific and psychological studies, we can start to see how people's behavior becomes much more stereotypically gendered when they're primed to be aware of the gender rules. It turns out our neuroendocrinology is much more complex than most of us are taught about in school. Just as one, for instance, our testosterone levels not only influence our behavior, but if we do a particular behavior, the testosterone level itself can rise or fall, right? And because both men and women have testosterone, according to what we're doing in that moment, and thereby not saying a particular hormone is gendered, but a particular action could be the thing that's impacting the hormone. And I invite you to look at Cy Van Ander's work for more about this. But we are dynamic and fluid creatures, not fixed and immutable ones. All right, so Genderqueer appears in 2022, and it was recognized, and this is the author, and it was recognized as a Stonewall Honor Book by the American Library Association. Now, when books get awards in the United States, they tend to be on lists, and librarians tend to buy them. And libraries, the buildings, contain books meant for children and books meant for teenagers, sometimes in the exact same building, not necessarily at all in the same area of the building, but this created controversy because there are a few, and I mean a very few, like maybe a page worth in the entire book of comments about being sexual. And this created sort of a cause that a political party took up as, we're endangering children by having this book in libraries. But I want to go beyond this. The book was the #1 banned book for 2 years in a running in America in various states. But unfortunately, when you look up this book, that's what you mostly hear about. And I'm wanting to talk about the book itself, not the banning controversy. So this is an autobiographical story, and it's a Bildungsroman, a story of development, right? It's geared at high schoolers looking for something to help them explain their own puzzlement, maybe about not feeling at home in their birth gender. So the book begins with the author's confession as a 24-year-old that when told to draw pictures of danger, they keep drawing the moment they thought their breasts would be growing or the moment they thought they might be getting a period. And that sort of surprise, that sort of is something that makes the 24-year-old think really hard about why is it that I had such a feeling of not being at home in my own body. The audience gets taken back in time to Maya being a child and wanting to swim with her shirt off. And then she's scorned and called a boy by others. So she felt more natural without a shirt on and being what other people saw as boyish. And she just said, why? Why can't I swim without my shirt on? So I want to pause over this rejection. She's rejected by peers over and over. And as both Huang and Nordmarken have analyzed in articles, gender variance has long been, associated with monstrosity. Nonconformity within gender or sexuality, but here we're talking about gender, is lumped as incomplete or as monstrous, to be distanced, to be feared. In the case of Maya, Maya is allowed to bloom as is by their parents. The hippie parents do not enforce strict gender rules. And M, they choose the pronoun M for themselves. So I will be trying to use M, but will probably sometimes say they accidentally. So forgive me if I don't get that right every time. But M has a very free, nature-filled childhood. But even so, this doesn't change their own visceral reaction to their body's changes. And of course, it doesn't change that the peers make fun of her, think fun of them. The book has gained readers because of all the scenes of adolescent self-questioning, which we can all relate to. Anytime you were typed as weird or not belonging, you can relate to this voice. Gradually, we learn about the crushes that the main character has, and we absorb that their gender mixture influences their sexual thoughts and makes them confused. And this is captured in two pictures and so I'm going to share them with you. So here's the main trait I've always been attracted to is androgyny. Did the girl with a buzz cut, a very short haircut there on the top, catch my eye because she was a girl or because she was dressed as a boy? Was it his, and this is now the boy, seemingly feminine or masculine qualities that drew me to the long-haired boy in choir, right? And then this one. Notice this sort of shell in which there's kind of a maze-like pattern. If I was trans, wouldn't I be saying I am a boy, not I wish I was a boy? Wouldn't I be more sure? And if I am trans, am I a gay boy or a straight boy or a bisexual boy? Except I'm not even sure if I want to have sex. Does that mean I'm asexual? And if I don't want to have sex, does my gender matter? Right? So all these ways in which these intricate wishes and desires are intertwined. Kobabe's memoir proceeds with the main character's questions one at a time. The book resists a standard timeline of gender development. That won't surprise you by now. It offers a cyclical unfolding of identity. Time in the body is experienced away from a clock and as an immersive moving through. The writer is not trying to get to an endpoint, not being that productive capitalist, a good capitalist citizen. They're not in a wrong body. They just feel that solely two categories can't express their reality. Gender's relationship to time may be more nuanced than any one step, including a medical step or procedure. A notion of wrong body fixed by some particular surgery is yet another idea that we're on this linear timeline and that happiness is going to be delivered, when really we can recognize the ongoing process of gender expression and identity development, particularly in the case of non-binary people. So I admire the information being given in comic book form as it provides a simplicity and a light feeling to a stigmatized topic. As Margaret Gowan has written, there's a long history of gay, lesbian, and trans comics, which enable artists to draw bodies and put them in positions that are on their own terms and might be conveying something more instantly to you than any prose could convey. So I think the comic form is suitable for enabling people to overcome fear of gender in betweenness. I mean, fear, the audience's fear itself, as well as perhaps the writer's fear that they experience as a smaller person. Eventually, Maya feels a wave of relief. M's level of acceptance comes through here. As I pondered a pronoun change, I began to think of gender less as a scale and more as a landscape. So now we've got a spatial metaphor. Some people are born in the mountains, others are born by the sea. Some people are happy to live in the place they were born, while others must make a journey to reach the climate in which they can flourish and grow. Between the ocean and the mountains is a wild forest. That is where I want to make my home. I'll stop sharing now. Although we follow the main character as a person growing through time, there is no clear endpoint. The last scene of the book shows Maya as an adult teaching 11 to 14-year-olds comic book writing. M wonders if coming out and saying I'm non-binary would be helpful to these kids who are 11 years old, because maybe there's a kid there who would be feeling confused. They hope to be available for the kids and share that truth, but we don't see them do it. The book's ending with the writers thinking about doing something rather than a decision underlines the idea that we are fluid and we are evolving beings, and that neither the human experience nor gender itself comes with tidy endings. So I'll be finishing up my talk now and happy to answer questions. To answer to the goal of SDG 5, creating gender equality, I feel we have to pay attention to altering our time scale, a time scale that's often ignored by policy and praxis, a time scale that could be based on cyclical time, could honor the earth and nature more, could honor caregiving more. Honoring cyclical time is a subtle but needed form of gaining equality for women, and it's essential for the long-term health of the planet. Through the literature discussed today, we can see no matter the culture or tradition, our human bodies keep time and they lead us in a rhythm. From Salma's story Toilets and Vinodini's story Block, we see the artificial suppression of bodily impulses and the harm against people who clean up waste, illustrating that the body becomes an archive of knowledge and memory and dignity, no matter what's going on. The novels reveal we are overly attached to a narrow way of thinking about time and a narrow rather than fluid understanding of gender. Whether reading The Color Purple, The Purple Line, or Gender Queer, we witness the potential of a liberated timescape, where a cycle of birth, self-acceptance, and transcendence could replace being constantly measured against some linear scale of productivity. Foregrounding cyclical time affirms care and embodied knowledge as central to a feminist and queer ethics. Literature here becomes the agent of temporal resistance. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Zare, for that fascinating talk and for the wide range of texts that you spoke about. And we'll now have questions and comments from the audience. Roy has a question. Please go ahead, Roy.
Thank you, Professor Zare, for the sincere and enlightening presentation. Most of the texts that you discussed, they are quite interesting. And one thing I noticed that many of them have in common is an aspect of bodily experience, particularly with feces and blood, both menstrual and otherwise. And you might relate to this since you had field work in India. It made me think about the situation in unreserved railway compartments in India. we call them the general compartments. So you can't reserve, you just have to get a ticket and board, and they are usually very crowded. So people generally don't get a place to sit. And what women and less assertive individuals experience in situations like this is that, first of all, it's very hard to reach the toilets, like one of the stories mentions, because physically it's very hard to access the toilet because it's very crowded. And what's even worse is that once one reaches the toilets, it's even harder to get back to one's where one initially was seated. And this isn't I felt that this isn't just a matter of overcrowding. There's also some kind of sadism involved in watching a woman or a less assertive individual trapped in a space that they are clearly uncomfortable with, and they are forced to remain in that space when others might come and defecate. And the toilets are far from clean, because they are most often they are blocked, and you have feces lying around. And because the problem with these compartments is that there are no vestibules connecting them to the rest of the train. So the railway law enforcement and the cleaning staff, they rarely visit these compartments except when the train is maybe stopped. So this is, I mean, what's remarkable about this space is that it happens every day in India. So it's kind of taken for granted. People no longer think of it as an anomaly. Like the Jews, they say that the trains that took them to the concentration camps were inhuman because they were very crowded, and people couldn't breathe and things like that. But that's exactly what happens in the case of the general compartments. And the aspect of time that you mentioned is also relevant, because even though the journey might be 6 hours or something, when one looks at it through the lens of trauma, it might feel like forever. Because you can't sit, you have to stand, and you have to stand surrounded by feces and tampons and god knows what. So it made me think of it, and how women and less assertive individuals are particularly vulnerable to situations like that, which we find every day and everywhere in India. So thank you, Dr. Professor Sam. That will be.
Thank you so much for that comment. You've actually helped elucidate the stories even more for me through that comment. I really appreciate that.
Professor Vinodini has joined, Professor M.M. Vinodini has joined the talk, and we are very grateful that she's joined. And are there any more questions, comments to Professor Zare?
Thank you so much, Vinodini, for being here. I'd be very happy to hear from folks on the call about the status of non-binary people, or maybe the status of the conversation about non-binary young people, because that would be helpful to me to know more from you all.
Hello, Bonnie. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hi, so good to hear from you. I just want to say that you have in so many ways redefined my understanding of time and temporality. But this should only be an extension of what you were speaking about, because we were particularly just looking at how the idea of time changes according to gender norms. Would you like to add something more on the other parameters that affects time, or the way time is experienced?
What are you thinking of particularly?
No, so are there other identity markers that changes according to a person views temporality?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
One is definitely gender, then there is sexuality. So I'm thinking about, are there other identity markers such as those, where also the way a person experience time. I'm sure disability is also another case, right? When you think about disability, the way a disabled person experiences time is very different from the others. So I'm just thinking about, are there other identity markers that would make an experience of time different?
Yes, thanks so much.
Aging, ditto. Aging would be. aging would be an identity marker. I remember all those jokes about superannuated people having a lot of time on their hands,
Yeah.
and the measurement of time being different. But it's also culturally coded. There is a lovely Amitav Ghosh essay about the Arab who sits and watches the sands shifting. I think it's the Imam and the Indian collection where Ghosh points out that what is it you see in the sand? Pretty much nothing. And it takes time for sand to move and reshape itself. So, what exactly is the Arab watching? He's watching time move. But time doesn't seem to move for all practical purposes when we look at it. So I think so that's culturally coded experience of time.
Yeah, true.
Yes.
Yeah, let me go ahead and add to this that there's been a lot of interesting work done on how time appears to people with ADHD, to people who are on the autism spectrum, for instance. So yeah, these are great points to bring out. Thanks for reminding me about the idea of disability time. You know, our university timelines are problematic for folks like that because we have such strict deadlines that are supposed to prove your academic worth. But if you are somebody who processes things in a different way, perhaps in a far more creative way than people who have very regular sort of, brain wiring process it, then you might be quote unquote slower, but then come out with something much more interesting and important to society. So I think it's really it's time for universities to start to detach from a strict one timeline fits all mode. And along those same lines, I would say that coming from a rural background to a university setting, to a central university like Hyderabad, coming from a rural setting to an urban, sophisticated, super elite setting, it takes a transition time that not always does the university provide for. So I would really love to see all universities in all parts of the world having this, providing some more scaffolding about moving into the time of English fluency, of even making new friends from new backgrounds. There's so much culture shock that can go on when you don't have these kinds of workshops and people following up with you who have a lot of, authority on campus, that can make the fact that you have a rural identity stand out as giving you a slower timeline through no fault of your own. So that's another thing that comes to mind.
Just adding to, do you think slower timelines are usually decided by how productive you are? How much does productivity play a role in our understanding of time? I'm sure you did mention some points in your presentation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we are a little too focused on productivity in terms of it being a little inhumane, but I will also add in the exact same breath, I recognize that academia and academic systems do depend on a certain amount of structure, right? So we're trying to get the balance right between being accommodating and helping people accommodate to the notion of producing something, but we also still, of course, in the end, need them to give us the product so that they can move on in their own timeline. So I don't want to be, I don't want to sound like I just want to get rid of timelines and productivity altogether, because that would be very realistic, right? Yeah.
If there are no more questions, may I now move on to a formal vote of thanks? And the first person to be thanked is obviously Professor Bonnie Zare for accepting our invitation and for speaking to us and for linking gender and time across a wide range of texts, authors, genres, and so on. So thank you, Professor Zare, for accepting our invitation and for being part of the UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies. And a big thank you to everybody in the audience for joining. And there are several who join regularly, and we hope that we'll have all of you, and if not more people in the talks that we have planned. ahead. And all these talks are being recorded and will be available in the YouTube channel of the UNESCO Chair as well as on the website. So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bonnie, for that. That was exhilarating listening to time and gender. An unusual perspective. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks for being here.